Hello and welcome to the Neurodivergent Social Work Voices campaign. I am Florence Smith, the Neurodivergent Social Worker and your host. If you've stopped in to listen, there must be a reason why. Maybe it's to listen to and learn from the first-hand experiences of neurodivergent, or as I like to call us, neurosparkly social workers, on how you can create a neuro-inclusive workplace. Or maybe you're seeking advice from other neurodivergent social workers about what works for them. Whatever your reason, it's nice to have you here, because for 1 month we will hear from 19 neurosparkly social workers. The conversations will explore 19 journeys, 19 unique neurological profiles, and 19 tips for other neurosparkly social workers. So, why has this campaign been launched? Well, it's been done with the vision to raise awareness, share knowledge, celebrate neurodivergence, as well as increase representation of neurosparkly social workers across the profession. You can find us everywhere from students, social work assistants, frontline professionals, educators, and managers. Today I'm talking with Sarah, a neurodivergent social worker. Firstly, Sarah, please could you tell me a little bit about your current and previous roles in social work?
So I'm fairly new to social work. I've just only completed my AYSE in July of this year. I was late to the social work party and completed the Step Up program and then went on to my AYSE with my local authority. So I can't give you loads and loads of experience, and I've recognised quite early on that I didn't think that I would be able to cope with the pace of a CP team or an assessment team.
Yeah.
And also my skills and knowledge made me lean towards children looked after. So I've did my second placement in the children looked after team and didn't let them kick me out. So that's where I've stayed. So I haven't got back very much experience, but I'm still sort of, 3 months into being fully qualified.
Oh, well, congratulations as well.
Thank you.
That's okay. And could you tell me a little bit about your neurodivergence or about how your brain sparkles?
So my neurodivergence, I have a diagnosis of dyslexia and dyspraxia. I've always known something wasn't quite right. And I was a child that was educated during the 70s when there was less knowledge and understanding around neurodivergence or its impact on education and stuff like that. But I definitely always struggled with spelling, writing, focus. And obviously having that late diagnosis, you look at your childhood and your education experiences in a very different way than what you would do, I guess, if you got that diagnosis earlier. And so I have the dyslexia, but I don't feel that the dyslexia jumper fits as well as what it could do. And there's Go on.
I was going to say, could you tell me a little bit more about that, if that's okay? What does dyslexia look like in your brain?
So I do have a background of working with SEN children within an education environment. And so I've worked with lots of different types of dyslexic children. And obviously everybody is very different if one dyslexic doesn't look like another. For me, I would say it was my working memory that was my biggest challenge, and spelling. I'm pretty sure I used to fill out the back of my books with my spelling, rewriting out my spellings quicker than I would fill out the front of them. And also, quite interestingly, last year my mum was going through some old photographs and found something I'd written when I was about 8 years old. It was actually quite sad to see it, because there was all this scratching out where I was trying and I'd written words twice and I'd written it dear granddad instead of dear granddad. So you could just see this 8-year-old me really struggling with things like that. So yeah, that's...
I liked what you said earlier in relation to when you meet one dyslexic person, you've met one dyslexic person.
Definitely.
That's it, because we are also different, and our brains are also different, and how our neurosparkliness or neurodivergence presents is also going to be different. I know you mentioned earlier that you also have a diagnosis of dyspraxia, and I was wondering what that might look like for you.
Notoriously clumsy.
Mm-hmm.
I even spilt gravy on my wedding dress on my wedding day, which is not a good look when you're wearing white. And yeah, just really clumsy things like that. And sometimes you have really bad clumsy days where you break a dish and a glass and that kind of thing. Always been rubbish at sports except for swimming. Yeah, ball games, stuff like that. Running. My mum still tells funny stories about when I had to run in sports day and things like that, and how she pretended not to know me because another parent was saying, "Whose child is that? Have you seen how they're running?"
I think with dyspraxia as well, it is kind of more commonly thought of as the clumsiness as well, isn't it? As opposed to sometimes the executive functioning and sensory side of dyspraxia too. Because that's what, when I kind of first learned that I had the diagnosis dyspraxia and read into it, had just kind of seen it as being clumsy. And a sport teacher I knew, this might sound a bit sad, but also kind of reduced dyspraxia down to clumsiness and saying, oh, well, if you can't think and you can't do, what's the point? And that really kind of, for me, exemplifies how knowledge hopefully has grown a little bit since then. Because I know last week was Dyspraxia Awareness Week, and it was really refreshing to see infographics on sports and dyspraxia. Because again, it's something that I really struggled with. I remember throwing the golf ball instead of actually hitting it because my sports teacher didn't want to wait. And sometimes when there isn't that knowledge and there isn't that support, you can kind of internalize shame.
Yeah, definitely. And I was always the last person to get chosen in PE for team games. So that also then has a self-esteem and impact on your development, doesn't it, when you're little?
Definitely.
Yeah. But there were, I mean, like, I was good at swimming. So, yeah, everybody's good at something, aren't they? So
Yeah.
when it comes to those kind of things. But yeah, and the organisation as well, particularly when I was younger, I've developed strategies as I've got older for disciplining myself to plan things, write to-do lists. And my working memory is particularly bad, and remembering to do things is actually quite challenging. I write on my hand quite a lot. When my kids were at school and you get all those awful letters to take into school and remember to do that, I would have a strategy for sticking them to the door. So I guess what counteracts some things is that when you have neurodivergence and you're able to problem solve, which then you develop a strength in problem solving because you encounter so many problems as you're growing up and becoming an adult.
That's it. And I was wondering, because I know, especially around dyslexia, there's Made by Dyslexia and also the Dyslexic Advantage, and they talk quite a lot about how strengths and challenges of dyslexic thinking are two sides of the same neurological coin. I was wondering if you had kind of noticed any strengths alongside the challenges that you've experienced?
Most definitely, yeah. Like something, I think I have like two people in my head sometimes. One that tells me I'm rubbish, and the other one goes, "God, you're amazing." Because you you have days where you do something and you go, nobody else would have thought like that. I'm absolutely the most amazing person on the planet. And then other days where you're having real struggles with keeping on top of your workload, or when you've got new pieces of work to do in social work, I've got really slow processing, and it takes me, 3 or 4 times to kind of get my head around what I'm supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to be doing it, and the purpose of what I'm doing and how do I write it, and sitting there tearing yourself apart because you're finding it so difficult. So yeah, again, like you say, 2 sides of a coin.
That's it. And sometimes our strengths can be, like you said, with the organisation, is how do we kind of manage the challenges, and we do kind of become stronger in that line of skill.
I also think it develops resilience because you're so used to pretty much on a daily basis facing some sort of challenge that your neurodivergence presents you, that you develop strategies and skills which enable you to function in extreme stress. So, and also, you don't fall apart under pressure because you're so used to experiencing lots of stress, challenges and pressure. So I think, again, that is something that, I mean, not everybody does, but I think for me personally, everybody just says, oh my God, you're so resilient, but you kind of have to be.
Yeah, and I think I noticed that with the Basel Special Interest Group. I think it came at a point where actually I was feeling pretty thin energy-wise. And since having a monthly kind of support group to go to and having seen other social workers as well who have said, actually, yeah, it's really difficult, that's actually kind of felt like it's propped my resilience up, and it's kind of refueled my energy bar, as it were, as well. So it's like I'm personally really thankful of the awareness that's slowly rippling through social work, because I'm hoping that soon there won't have to be this individual resilience, and hopefully there'll be kind of like a collective responsibility and collective action that that we don't have to feel kind of burnt out at the end of the day.
No, we don't. But one of my favourite things is to get in my pajamas and watch telly. So and I give myself permission to have those weekends where I don't do an awful lot other than out cleaning the house and eating rubbish food and just staying in your pajamas and maybe going for a dog walk if I've got the energy for it. But yeah, definitely being kind to myself and giving myself permission to manage that, either burn out at the end of the day or, when you've had a particularly busy week, to actually give yourself space.
And it's that permission giving as well, because I too have got to a point where it's, okay, I'm explicitly and enthusiastically giving myself permission to rest.
Yeah.
But I found that when I first started, I would be comparing myself to other colleagues and other social workers who were neurotypical and were doing things outside of work hours or had extra hobbies alongside. And to give myself permission to rest and to stop comparing myself to neurotypical people who don't need the same rest and recharging that I might need. I'm not sure if I finished mid-sentence there, Sarah.
That's all right. A part of our traits is losing track halfway through what we're saying, so it's all good. I call it glitching. You kind of zone out, don't you? And then it's like, oh, I've lost track of where I was and what I was saying. And
exactly that.
I'd like to bring up at this point also the challenges of being a 50 slightly plus social worker as well, the impact of menopause on the neurodivergence as well. I find I really struggle with brain fog. And then what you were just saying about when you're trying to find a word or something like that, it really has had a significant impact on the quality of my writing sometimes, where it's almost like a physical sensation of fogginess. And I have, like you said, since read research that highlight the marriage between different hormones, and even dopamine and sertraline and melatonin and things like that, how we are actually more sensitive to our own bodies, and the impact our own bodies have on our brains, and being able to how it impacts our executive functioning. Yeah, definitely there are times where I feel sharper and have good days, and then there are other days where your body's maybe not be quite as in balance, and you experience more executive functioning difficulties. So it's not like you're neurodivergent and you're consistently experiencing your neurodivergence in one day, in one way. You can actually have really bad days.
And Sarah, could you tell me about your experiences of social work? So this could be ranging from your studies to your experiences of recruitment, onboarding, and also your ASYE maybe.
I think I found the studying and particularly difficult because I would either get a first for an essay or I would scrape a pass. So there was no, I don't think there was a middle ground for me. I either really understood something very well, or was still at the beginning of my learning in terms of whatever it was I was being expected to write. I found it really difficult to understand my neurotypical teachers. And a lot of the time, we had one presentation, and obviously we did it during the pandemic, so we had a very different student experience. She had done this really long presentation, and the presentation was in different fonts and different colors, and there was 100 and something pages of it. And she was like, "Oh, we're not having but can you read this?" And I was like, "Well, no, I can't." So I couldn't access the learning. I wasn't the only neurodivergent student. And also being pushed through, like having neurotypical expectations of your case, especially during AYSE year and stuff like that, having, there's a set program that at 3 months you're supposed to have so many cases, and then by 6 months and 9 months your caseload increases. And then came a point where I was still consolidating my learning and couldn't cope with having the same caseload as other students and AYSEs.
That's a really important point to raise as well, because we don't pass our assessed and supported year in employment based on the number of people that we work with or the number of assessments we complete. You pass it based on your capabilities to practice, and that's one thing I found really interesting as well, is that there is little reasonable adjustments in terms of our caseload, and that actually we do need that processing time, especially when we are in our ASYE or even starting out in a new role, for example, is giving that leeway.
I'm quite fortunate now in that my manager is quite protective, and she has a good understanding of my needs, even now as a qualified social worker. And I only really have to raise with her that, and I have a quite complex personal life as well. So sometimes I do experience overwhelm, and you kind of get to the point where you're got an adoption case coming through, and a CNF assessment to write, and your own kids got stuff going on, and your mum's not well, and all those things can give you weeks of where you're feeling really overwhelmed. And my manager's been amazing, and he's really supportive, and asked me the question, what can I do to help? What would help you right now? So she's really lovely. I'm very, very fortunate, which is probably why I won't be moving for a while unless she does.
So question 3 is, what advice would you give to other neurosparkly social workers?
I think we are sort of, in terms of seeking diagnosis, I think you definitely should. I think there is still quite significant misunderstanding of neurodivergent social workers, and often we might come across to somebody who has very little knowledge around neurodivergence as being rude or being inefficient or having poor practice or violating boundaries. For example, by that I mean my understanding of the way that neurodivergent people empathize is that we relate things back to our own personal experiences, which then creates, like, well, I've experienced this. And sometimes you might share things with service users that neurotypical social workers might have more rigid boundaries around. And I don't know if that makes sense.
Being able to relate to families is so important because representation's important.
Definitely. And I think that's a reflect in action piece of practice, isn't it? That sometimes when you're with a service user, in your mind, you're going, oh, well, this has happened to me. And again, reflecting whether it would be helpful to this person.
And there was something that you said there, which I think is really important to the conversation of how we relate and share, is that we aren't sharing kind of the personal intricate feelings, but we're sharing that shared experience of a certain feeling of, it might be, actually, I have sat in the feeling of feeling stuck and feeling scared and not feeling that I can move, without sharing actually what might have led you up to that feeling.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's, for me, it's been a challenge because coming into social work quite late as well, it's more normal for me to have those. I mean, we like to info dump, don't we, sometimes? And oversharing is quite typical of neurodivergent people. And we communicate differently. So I think that in some ways can be very challenging. So that would be in terms of seeking diagnosis. Having that diagnosis is self-protective in that it gives a lens of understanding. But also it can also create its own challenges in that wider society may not necessarily have an understanding and put you into a stereotypical box of dyslexia or dyspraxia or autism or ADHD, as opposed to having deeper understanding of our spiky profiles. So avoiding the stereotypes is also a pro and a con from getting a diagnosis. Well, if you've already got a diagnosis, how do you help your managers, your colleagues understand your experience of whatever your diagnosis is?
Could you, because I know you said that you get a lot of you get support that you find beneficial from your manager. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. And that's because of something that you've just said, and it's just left my mind. I mean, how did you communicate with your manager about your neurodivergence and the need for support?
I guess when you get the diagnosis, there's a lot of unmasking that goes on, because a lot of the times I think you hide those traits because they're shameful, because you feel stupid, because other people, you have a view that other people will see you negatively. And so when I've got the diagnosis and then self-reflected and did a lot of self-reflecting as part of the Step Up program, and being a student, you do a lot of reflecting to come to a point where you actually understand your own needs quite well. So for example, knowing that I've got slower processing and it takes me more time to learn new things than might be typical of the average Joe, I can actually say, I need a few more times. I need you to can we have some time together so that you can actually go through this with me and show me where I'm not getting this right, where I've misunderstood. So asking for what you need more often,
Mhm.
I think it's well received by my manager. I'm not sure that everybody's manager would be the same. Um,
Can feel like the luck of the draw sometimes, can't it?
yeah, and I think that possibly lack of understanding will mean negative judgment about your practice. And we should feel safe within the social work environment to be able to be ourselves without discrimination, um, and misunderstanding, and be able to say, I need, I don't know, a certain kind of tech, or, we should be able to ask for our needs. I don't even think that some of these, so I've had, I've forgotten what they're called now, where they assess your needs for reasonable adjustments, and kind of felt it was just a tick box thing, as opposed to this person actually really understood my specific neurodivergent needs and was able to suggest reasonable adjustments. I think the only thing in there was that I would need a balanced caseload, because if I had too many cases that were challenging, quite a lot of your casework is literally just firefighting, and it doesn't leave you time and space to write reports or your other work. So yeah, that was one thing that came out of that. It's been really interesting reflecting on this with somebody else as well, and somebody else who kind of has a lens of understanding, really. So yeah.
I don't know, for so long, it's been like you have this internal narrative or external narratives of you're doing something wrong, you've got deficits, or, all those mini messages that you get throughout your lifetime. And it's nice to sit and speak with other neurodivergent people where we can actually like lean into it. And it's the one time that I don't have to kind of manage or try and shake off internalized shame.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I know both of us during the course of the interview have lost our thread several times.
I don't.
To actually call it that from a lens of humor, like, oh, we do that, I do that as well, and it's hilarious. Being somebody sitting there going, oh God, she can't even get, she can't speak properly. I don't know about you as well. It's in some meetings, I find them quite intimidating, depending on the professionals present. And quite often, when you're put on the spot like that, you have this huge sense of anxiety, and it actually makes it worse that you can't actually speak.
Yeah.
You and I have felt very comfortable now and have waffled on for ages, and are actually feel very comfortable, not feeling like we're going to be judged or that we're viewing each other negatively. You're kind of coming at each other from a shared experience, so it's lovely.
Sarah, thank you for giving your time to celebrate neurodivergence in social work and for sharing your experiences. And thank you to everyone who has listened. If you are interested in learning more about neurodivergent social workers and neuroinclusion, please check out the Neurodivergent Social Work website in the British Association of Social Workers Special Interest Group. The link for both will be in the description. Thank you.